Liberia's $10 million villa scandal, Boakai's integrity on trial, a wake-up call for African leadership. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where Africa speaks truth to power. From Monrovia to Nairobi, from Freetown to Addis Ababa, one story echoes across the continent, the battle between power and accountability. I'm your host, Zainab Karoma. Today, we turn our spotlight on Liberia, where reports of a $10 million presidential villa and a nepotism scandal are raising uncomfortable questions about integrity, governance, and the future of democracy in Africa. When civil society allegations of a U.S. $10 million presidential villa in Foya, Lofa County surfaced in late 2025, it lit up public discourse across Liberia. The Center for Transparency and Accountability in Liberia, CENTAL, immediately demanded clarity from President Joseph Nyuma Boakai's administration, charging that the project was not in the national budget and risked violating procurement laws. Simultaneously, CENTAL lambasted a nepotism scandal involving Chief Justice Yamie Gbeisay's nomination of his son to the Judiciary, a controversial move later reversed after public backlash. If there were a recipe for civic anxiety, this is it. Large sums of opaque spending, plus elite capture, plus weak institutional pushback. But to understand its full implications, one must see not just Liberia in isolation, but in African context, and look ahead to whether this becomes a turning point or yet another scandal that fades into bureaucratic noise. Anatomy of the allegations and responses. The Villa Project. Illusions, denials, and secrecy. CENTAL's central claim is simple. No line item exists in the 2024-25 national budget for a presidential villa under the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs or any other agency, i.e., the project is off books. When prodded, Deputy Information Minister Daniel Sando denied that this was a private presidential project, instead framing it as part of a Mano River Union, MRU initiative, fitting Foya's positioning near Guinea and Sierra Leone. But attempts to verify funding through MRU channels reportedly failed. The MRU Secretariat referred civil society actors back to Sando for documentation. Local reporting, Front Page Africa, names the contractor as MUSNS Groups Incorporated, led by Joe Mulba, allegedly an associate of the president, and cites engineer Edward Yamba in technical supervision. The construction is said to have begun September 10, 2024, and the site is under state security guard. Critics argue that $10 million could instead fund infrastructure that benefits many rather than a grand vanity house in a presidential hometown. A factory that would create jobs could be built for used $10 million, one activist asked. Meanwhile, county officials and the press reportedly have been denied access to the site, fueling suspicions of secrecy. The optics are bad. To many, it looks like a prestige project benefiting Boakai's native Lofa rather than addressing pressing national needs, roads, health, schools. Indeed, social media chatter leans toward calling this Villa Gate. Nepotism in the Judiciary, a test for code of conduct. The second flashpoint involves Chief Justice Gbeisay recommending his own son, William Gbeisay, as an associate magistrate in Painesville. The nomination was later withdrawn under pressure. CENTAL notes that Liberia's Code of Conduct, Section 1.3.16, and sanctions under Section 9.8, defines nepotism as public officials appointing or promoting family members within the same branch of government and allows penalties from reprimand to removal and a ban from public service for up to 5 years. Chief Justice Gbeisay, however, denied any breach. He claimed the law is silent on qualifications for associate magistrates and that the president acted within constitutional rights. Legal analysts reject that defense, pointing to the 2014 Code and constitutional conflict of interest provisions. An editorial in Front Page Africa called his defense a failure of leadership and argued that this is not a technical legal loophole, but a fundamental lapse in propriety. While Williams' withdrawal eases immediate pressure, CENTAL insists the misconduct must still be sanctioned and the code enforced, else it becomes symbolic window dressing. Liberia in African Perspective, Scandals, Secrecy, and the Struggle for Credibility. To see the stakes, it's helpful to compare Liberia's experience with neighboring and continental patterns. Common patterns across Africa. 1. Hometown projects and prestige, spending. Many African leaders have allocated resources to their home regions, sometimes called pork barrel spending in parliamentary systems. In Nigeria, governors often prioritize their home states with infrastructure or contracts. In Kenya, fund allocations like the Constituency Development Fund are sometimes skewed. The risk is that these projects serve political symbolism more than public good and often bypass competitive processes. 2. Off-budget projects and parallel financing. In several countries, high-profile development projects, guest houses, presidential lodges, megastadia, have been funded outside the main budget, sometimes through state enterprises or agencies with weak oversight. This weakens parliamentary control. In Uganda, for example, presidential infrastructure has long been opaque. In Zimbabwe, state machineries are occasionally used for high-value assets whose accounts aren't clear. 3. Nepotism and elite capture in the Judiciary. Africa has seen its fair share of judicial capture. Appointments of relatives, political loyalists, or unqualified cadres to key courts. In Nigeria, some state-level courts have been criticized for appointing politically connected judges. In Zimbabwe and Ethiopia, courts have been seen as extensions of executive will. The key danger, once the judiciary is compromised, the promise of a check on executive abuse weakens. 4. Civil society as the last line of defense. Across the continent, the strength of civil society, media, and anti-corruption agencies determines whether scandals fizzle or force accountability. Where civil society is weak or repressed, frauds persist with impunity. How Liberia's case compares. Scale relative to economy. $10 million is large for Liberia's fiscal capacity. Any major discretionary spending not accounted for is more visible. Institutional fragility. Liberia is still rebuilding institutions, post-war legacy, and public trust is low, so the margin for error is smaller than in some larger, more mature systems. Capacity for pushback. CENTAL's vocal role. The mobilization of legal scholars and media criticism suggests that the civic space in Liberia remains vibrant. That could force stronger outcomes than in more repressive settings. Symbolism. Because Boakai is from Lofa and is of advanced age, critics say this project feels less about governance and more about legacy or patronage. The risk of it being seen as a vanity project is higher. In short, Liberia's controversies mirror broader African patterns, but the weak margins for error and strong watchdog pushback mean this episode may be more consequential here than in some other settings. Critical analysis, risks, realities, and retrospective judgments, legal versus ethical breaches. One might argue that the Boakai Villa project, even if not illegal in letter, violates norms of transparency, accountability, and fiscal prudence. If the procurement laws, public financial management statutes, and the Public Procurement and Concession Commission, PPCC, are not respected, the line between legality and impunity blurs. Similarly, Chief Justice Gbeisay's defense that his son's appointment is technically lawful misses the point. Public institutions depend heavily on legitimacy and public trust. A move may be legal, but ruinous in trust. The silent budget problem. If large state projects can be initiated without reflection in budget documents or legislative oversight, then the entire fiscal architecture becomes hollow. The executive effectively creates a parallel budget line invisible to Parliament, a creeping off-book state. That's a structural threat to accountability. Slippery slopes and precedents. If Boakai is allowed to proceed without scrutiny, future leaders can cite this as precedent. Likewise, if the judiciary is seen to excuse nepotism at the top, junior judges may feel free to do the same. The reputational cost is cumulative. Political costs versus public costs. From a political lens, Boakai may believe he can absorb the fallout, especially if some portion of the public is indifferent or participates in patronage networks. But the public cost in cynicism, erosion of rule of law, discouraged investment, and talent flight is high. Moreover, the timing is awkward. Boakai's administration has publicly stressed anti-corruption and accountability as priorities, e.g., asset declaration, audits. The Villa scandal directly challenges his credibility on those promises. Forward-looking, what must happen or risk being lost, recommended institutional responses. 1. Immediate disclosure and independent audit. The government should publicly disclose all technical, contract, and funding documents for the Foya project. An independent audit, domestic and/or international, should report to Parliament and the public. 2. Engagement of the legislature and oversight bodies. Parliament, especially appropriation and oversight committees, must demand formal explanations. Anti-corruption institutions, LACC, the Ombudsman, Asset Recovery Task Force, should open investigations immediately. 3. Code enforcement and sanctions. The code of conduct must not be idle. Even if Willian's appointment was withdrawn, Chief Justice Gbeisay should still be held accountable as per Section 9.8, reprimand, suspension, or prohibition from holding government office. Sanctions should be more than symbolic. 4. Reform of budget transparency. Liberia must tighten its budget formulation and execution laws. No off-books projects. Any project over a threshold must be fully accounted in budget documents and undergo competitive procurement. 5. Civil society and media safeguards. Civil society and investigative media should be supported legally and financially to monitor progress. Whistleblower protections are essential. Possible scenarios and risks. Best case, the administration concedes some accountability, cancels or rescopes the villa, sanctions wrongdoing, and strengthens institutions. The scandal becomes a turning point in Liberia's democratic maturation. Middle case, the project continues, but sanitized disclosures are made. Some token resignations or reprimands occur, but no structural changes. Public skepticism remains, trust erodes further. Worst case, the government stonewalls, suppresses investigations, and the project proceeds unchecked. The judiciary's capture becomes entrenched, and future scandals find fewer barriers. Strategic opportunities. Leveraging international pressure. Liberia, being elected as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for 2026 to 27, is under international spotlight. Donors, partners, and multilateral bodies can press for transparency. Digital transparency tools. Launching a public online portal where all government capital projects, funding sources, contracts, and progress reports are posted could set a new benchmark. Civic education and engagement. Turning the scandal into a teachable moment. Supporting local forums, radio programs, and district town halls to explain why fiduciary probity matters, so the public becomes harder to fool. Latest developments and signals as of October 2025. CENTAL has formally called for the sanctioning of Chief Justice Gbeisay under Section 9.8 of the Code of Conduct. The presidency announced the resignation or withdrawal of Willian Gbeisay as Associate Magistrate Designate, though CENTAL argues that this does not fully remedy the misconduct. The Liberian public, media, and legal fraternity continue to debate whether the president will lead by example or retreat into opacity. On the Villa side, although the Deputy Information Minister has denied it is a presidential project, the name of the contractor, MUCNS, and technical supervisor has been publicly circulated. Editorials have begun to scold the Chief Justice's missteps as a failure of example and warn of deeper institutional decay if the status quo is allowed to stand. Lessons from across Africa. How not to build a villa or a dynasty. If Liberia's alleged $10 million villa story sounds familiar, that's because Africa has long been a gallery of architectural excess and dynastic succession planning. From Nigeria's ASO rock renovations to Uganda's State House expansions, it seems our leaders love concrete monuments almost as much as they love campaign slogans. Let's stroll gingerly through a few cautionary parallels. 1. Nigeria, the Abuja syndrome. Nigeria's political class has a peculiar talent for transforming public offices into private palaces. In 2022, a Senate committee famously queried a multi-billion naira presidential wing of the Abuja airport, whose purpose nobody could quite define, except that it would be befitting. Sound familiar? The justification is always national pride, but the outcome is often elite comfort. Liberia's Foya villa debate fits right in. If Abuja's wings were built for VIPs, why shouldn't Foya have its own runway for visiting dignitaries from Guinea and Sierra Leone? The trouble is, Liberians didn't vote for architectural tourism, they voted for accountability. 2. Kenya, the hustler's palace. Kenya's State House refurbishments during President William Ruto's tenure sparked uproar when taxpayers discovered that millions were spent on private residences, even as citizens struggled with cost of living spikes. The justification was security and official representation, yet ordinary Kenyans quipped online, "Security from whom? Us?" Liberians are now asking a similar question. If the Foya Villa is for Mono River Union conferences, why the secrecy? And why in the President's Village rather than Monrovia, where MRU actually sits? It's the same old trick. Rename luxury as strategic necessity. 3. Ghana, nepotism and the family tree presidency. Ghana, under both NPP and NDC governments, has faced recurring accusations of family and friends governance. Appointing relatives to key ministries became so normalized that a local comedian joked, "Soon we'll have a ministry of cousins and aunties." Chief Justice Gbeisay's appointment of his son follows that very African pattern, where public offices become family heirlooms and service to the nation quietly morphs into service to the family. The public backlash in Liberia is healthy because it shows society still knows the difference. 4. Sierra Leone, the transparency mirage. Just across the border, President Julius Maada Bio's administration has also faced questions about opaque spending, from foreign property acquisitions to First Lady projects. Reports by the EU Election Observation Mission and the Carter Center have underscored declining transparency and accountability. Liberia risks drifting down the same path, a transparency mirage where anti-corruption slogans glow brightly while shadow budgets and family appointments thrive beneath. The bigger picture, the governance paradox in Africa. Here's the irony. Across Africa, governments loudly proclaim reform, transparency, and modernization, often in PowerPoint decks at donor conferences, while quietly entrenching old habits at home. It's as if we're playing a regional game of do as I say, not as I construct. The villa and nepotism controversies expose a deeper structural issue, the dual identity of governance. On one hand, African leaders crave the image of reformers. On the other, they govern through patronage networks that make reform nearly impossible. Until the incentives change, until corruption costs more than it pays, no number of anti-corruption workshops will fix the culture. Forward-looking roadmap. How Liberia can turn scandal into strategy 1. Institutional integrity starts at the top. President Boakai must do what few African leaders have ever done, voluntarily invite independent scrutiny into his own administration's alleged projects. If he authorizes a public audit of the Foya Villa, he could turn crisis into credibility. A transparent leader earns moral authority, something money can't buy, not even 10 million. 2. Empower the oversight ecosystem. Liberia's Parliament, the General Auditing Commission, and the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, LACC, need both autonomy and teeth. These institutions must not depend on presidential goodwill. Donor agencies and the EU can link future budget support to measurable progress on procurement transparency. 3. Digitize and democratize budget data. Make all capital projects visible on a national open budget platform, showing costs, contractors, and progress photos. Kenya's IFMIS portal and Ghana's open data dashboard are imperfect but useful templates. When citizens can see where the money goes, ghost projects vanish faster than campaign promises after elections. 4. Depersonalize the state. Africa's greatest governance curse is personalization. Power, resources, and even justice revolve around individuals, not institutions. Liberia must build systems that outlive personalities. A villa can crumble. A rule-bound procurement system endures. 5. Reset public ethics. Civil service training, judicial ethics codes, and leadership programs should integrate anti-nepotism case studies, real examples of misconduct and consequences. Make integrity aspirational again. Liberia could even launch an ethics ambassadors program in schools and universities, because tomorrow's leaders are today's students, not today's appointees. A dash of humor because we need it sometimes. Humor explains what policy cannot. In Monrovia cafes, jokes already circulate. If every president builds a $10 million villa, soon Liberia will have more villas than hospitals and still no light at night. Another quip says, nepotism is when your father becomes Chief Justice and your first case is against your mother for curfew violations. Liberians have learned to laugh through pain, but their jokes carry deep truth. Unchecked privilege erodes hope faster than inflation. The Continental stakes Liberia's situation is a mirror for Africa's larger struggle. Can democracy coexist with old patronage instincts? Across the continent, public disillusionment is growing. Surveys by Afrobarometer 2024 show declining trust in governments from Senegal to Zambia, especially among youth. If Boakai's administration fails to handle this scandal transparently, it will reinforce cynicism that all African leaders start humble and end marble, literally in marble villas. But if Liberia corrects course, it could model post-scandal accountability. Imagine the headlines: Liberia sets new anti-corruption precedent. President opens villa audit, Chief Justice sanctioned. That would be a Continental first worthy of applause and perhaps a better legacy than any villa. The regional ripple effect neighboring nations are watching closely. Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Côte d'Ivoire all belong to the Mano River Union. Their own governance indicators are under scrutiny by ECOWAS and the African Peer Review Mechanism. If Liberia demonstrates serious accountability, it could pressure others in the sub-region to follow suit. Conversely, if Boakai's government doubles down on opacity, the message across West Africa will be clear. Reform is for speeches, not for practice. The CENTAL saga is more than a scandal. It's a stress test for Liberia's democratic institutions. The villa may stand or fall, but what truly matters is whether the rule of law stands taller than concrete walls. African nations don't need more presidential palaces. They need presidential principles, because at the end of the day, good governance isn't measured by the size of your villa, but by whether your people can afford a roof. The economic undercurrent, when scandals meet spreadsheets. In the global marketplace, corruption isn't just a moral failure, it's an economic liability. Investors may tolerate risk, but they despise uncertainty. And nothing screams uncertainty like a government that builds a $10 million villa nobody can find in the national budget. 1. Investor confidence and the villa effect. Foreign investors often read two documents before entering a country: the National Budget and the Transparency International, TI, Corruption Perceptions Index. When one doesn't match the other, alarm bells ring. Liberia currently ranks 142nd out of 180 countries on the 2024 TI Index with a score of 26,100, reflecting persistent governance challenges. Transparency International, 2024. Now imagine being a potential investor in renewable energy, palm oil, or telecommunications, and you hear that the president's hometown is hosting a secret multi-million-dollar villa project that bypassed the budget process. Your next move? You quietly shift your attention to Ghana or Côte d'Ivoire, where at least you can predict how the money moves, even if not always perfectly. Investors are not saints. They just want predictability. A hidden villa means hidden risks, and hidden risks mean higher cost of capital. 2. donor confidence and the risk of reputational downgrades. International donors, particularly the World Bank, USAID, and the EU, have poured billions into Liberia's post-war reconstruction. They've heard every promise: transparency, reform, accountability, so often that some could recite them backward in their sleep. Scandals like this one have real consequences. Donors use governance performance as a condition for budget support, debt relief, or special development grants. For example, the EU's Budget Support Guidelines 2023 require evidence of credible public financial management systems. A $10 million villa with no line in the budget, that's not just a missing receipt, it's a diplomatic red flag. The result could be funding delays, project suspensions, or tighter conditionalities in future aid. In plain English, Liberia may soon find that the donor's check comes with more small print than a mobile data contract. 3. The domestic opportunity cost. Let's break down that $10 million. According to the World Bank, Liberia's 2024 per capita GDP is around $830. That means the villa's cost equals the annual income of over 12,000 Liberians, or the construction of 80 rural clinics, 250 primary schools, or 200 kilometers of paved roads. So when citizens see palatial construction in Foya while potholes bloom like wildflowers across Monrovia, the optics become political suicide dressed in marble tiles. Governance and global rankings, Liberia's credibility scorecard. The Mo Ibrahim Index IIAG. Liberia's 2023 score on the Ibrahim Index of African Governance, IIAG, stood at 48.7 out of 100, slightly below the West African average. While it scored decently on participation and human rights, it struggled in accountability and transparency, two indicators now directly implicated by this scandal. Mo Ibrahim Foundation 2023 report. A visible lack of follow-up on the CENTAL revelations could drag Liberia further down, reinforcing perceptions of elite impunity. The irony? Boakai came to office promising to restore integrity to governance. It's a reminder that in African politics, reformist reputations often travel faster than reformist actions. The World Bank's governance indicators. Liberia's 2023 worldwide governance indicators rank it poorly in control of corruption, 25th percentile, and government effectiveness, 30th percentile. Each public scandal chips away at these already fragile metrics. The impact isn't abstract. These scores affect sovereign credit ratings, foreign direct investment, FDI inflows, and even diaspora remittance behavior. In short, scandals like Villagate don't just hurt reputation, they raise the cost of doing business for every Liberian entrepreneur, from cocoa exporters to fintech startups. Regional implications. The Mano River domino effect. Liberia's governance image doesn't exist in a vacuum. The Mano River Union, consisting of Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Côte d'Ivoire, is interlinked by trade, migration, and shared donor programs. If one member becomes synonymous with corruption or nepotism, the others feel the diplomatic aftershock. Sierra Leone, still battling credibility issues after the 2023 election transparency controversy, could see donors tighten scrutiny over its projects. Guinea's junta, which seized power promising to end corruption, will point to Liberia as proof that civilian governments aren't always cleaner. Côte d'Ivoire, the sub-region's economic powerhouse, will quietly distance itself from Mano River dysfunction, further isolating Liberia. The tragedy is that Liberia, Africa's oldest republic and once a democratic beacon, now risks being lumped in with the region's governance laggards. The political fallout, trust, legitimacy, and the Boakai dilemma. President Boakai is in a tough spot. He built his campaign narrative around integrity, humility, and service. But scandals, especially early in a term, can create a trust deficit that no infrastructure project can pave over. The political danger lies in perception. Even if the villa turns out to be funded by donors or the MRU, the secrecy already damaged the narrative. Voters remember emotions, not explanations. Liberia's youth, who make up over 60% of the population, are increasingly cynical about politics. To them, every transparency pledge sounds like an expired ringtone. If Boakai doesn't act decisively, his government could lose the moral authority to govern effectively, much like what happened to Sierra Leone's Bio after unfulfilled anti-corruption promises. The diaspora factor, the global reputation of home. The Liberian diaspora in the United States, Canada, and Europe remains a key source of remittances, estimated at over $350 million annually, but remittance flows depend partly on national image and trust in institutions. When diaspora Liberians see headlines like $10 million presidential villa with no budget approval, they're less likely to invest in local businesses or return home to build. Why risk your hard-earned savings in a system that can hide $10 million and smile for the camera? Diaspora groups may even pressure Western governments and donor institutions to demand stricter transparency conditions before approving aid. Liberia's scandal thus travels farther than Foya. It lands squarely in Washington, Ottawa, and Brussels boardrooms, a forward-looking approach, turning crisis into capital. Here's the twist. Scandals like these, if managed boldly, can actually strengthen institutions. 1. Audit as reform catalyst. An independent investigation, made public, could demonstrate a new era of openness. Rwanda's post-2010 audit reforms, for instance, turned a donor crisis into a governance turnaround story. 2. Civic empowerment. Instead of silencing CENTAL and NAMOT, the government could invite them to participate in procurement monitoring. Transform watchdogs into partners, not enemies. 3. Ethical leadership as economic strategy. Transparency isn't charity, it's competitive advantage. Countries with visible accountability attract more investment. Ghana's Public Procurement Authority e-platform increased investor trust. Liberia could replicate that. 4. Rebranding Liberia. The Boakai administration could seize this moment to reintroduce Liberia globally, a country confronting corruption head-on, not sweeping it under red carpets. International investors love redemption stories. They're good for ESG reports and conference panels. Humor in the hard truths. Liberians are joking that the Foya villa may soon appear on Airbnb. $5,000 per night, Wi-Fi included, accountability not. But beneath the laughter lies an important question. If governments keep building villas while citizens can't afford rent, who exactly are they serving? Humor in African politics isn't just entertainment, it's resistance. It's how ordinary people hold power accountable when formal institutions hesitate. Rebooting the watchdogs, from slogans to sanctions, Liberia's accountability stack has the right boxes on paper: LACC, investigation and prosecution; PPCC, procurement rules and oversight; GAC, audits; Office of the Ombudsman, code of conduct enforcement; and now an asset recovery task force under executive order. But performance hinges on three things: clarity of mandate, operational independence, and public transparency. 1. Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, LACC. Use the new teeth. What it can do now. Under the amended and restated LACC Act, 2022, the Commission has explicit authority to independently investigate and prosecute corruption and to pursue sanctions and penalties, including asset declarations enforcement. What it should do next: Foya Villa and Nepotism. 1. Open a suo motu investigation into funding sources, contracting chain, and beneficial ownership for the Foya works. Alleged contractor: MUSNS Groups Incorporated. Technical supervisor reportedly Edward Yamba. Secure site records and contract registers. Issue preservation notices to relevant ministries and the county administration. 2. Coordinate with the Ombudsman on the Chief Justice episode. If code violations are substantiated, transmit a prosecution disciplinary brief to the competent authority pursuant to the Code of Conduct and the Act. 3. Publish a public-facing case timeline, milestones, evidence classes, statutory steps. Delays without timelines are how scandals die of bureaucratitis, mild joke to stay human. LACC should prosecute cases, not just hold press conferences. Press conferences don't go to jail. 2. Public Procurement and Concessions Commission, PPCC, close the off-books door. The law says all public procurement and concessions must follow the PPCC Act regime: tenders, competition, publication, review, sanctions. The Commission can inspect records, review processes, and formulate policy/standards, including EGP, electronic government procurement. What to do now? 1. Rapid compliance review of any works and services in Foya to determine whether they are publicly financed, grant financed, or privately financed, but later intended as a public asset. If any public funds, grants, or in-kind public resources are involved, security details, state logistics, full PPCC compliance applies. 2. If government's line is that this is an MRU conference facility, publish MRU documentation, letters of award, financing terms, and host site, justification, in PPCC's disclosure window. Otherwise, the MRU story is just, well, a story. 3. Mandate EGP posting of all capital projects over a set threshold, say use $250K, with contractor names, values, and progress photos. Liberia already advertises EGP ambitions. Time to make it the default. 3. General Auditing Commission, GAC. Forensic, not annual, audits. Shift from cyclical to forensic. Launch a targeted forensic audit on capital projects initiated or scoped outside the printed budget. Track, funding source, commitment controls, environment decisions, and any special projects lines. Make the management letter public, not just the summary. 4. Office of the Ombudsman. Enforce the code, don't frame it. The rulebook, Liberia's Code of Conduct, defines nepotism and allows penalties up to removal and 5-year bars from public service. CENTAL has explicitly cited Section 9.8. Action. Proceed with an independent determination on the Chief Justice matter. Withdrawal of the nominee is not equal to accountability. Publish the reasoning and statutory basis. Deterrence needs daylight. 5. Asset Recovery Task Force. Coordinate, don't collide. Context: President Boakai set up an Asset Recovery Task Force by executive order in March 2024 to track stolen state assets. Guardrails: give the task force clear case selection criteria and require it to hand off corruption predicate offenses to LACC for prosecution to avoid turf wars. Quarterly public dashboards: assets traced, restrained, repatriated, build credibility. A playbook Liberia could actually use, borrowed and improved and from peers. Rwanda's donor-triggered audit reforms, post-2010, show how a crisis can hardwire controls. Ghana's e-procurement and PPA disclosure windows improved bid hygiene. Kenya's IFMIS Plus a controller of budget reports, despite imperfections, made virement and arrears visible. Sierra Leone's procurement reforms show how publication of award data changes behavior even when sanctions lag. The lesson: visibility precedes virtue. You can't clean what you can't see. Applied to Liberia: 1. No entry without entry. Rule: no project can proceed without a budget entry ID and PPCC notice number. 2. Single public portal. Merge budget, procurement, contract, payment, physical progress into one public tracker. Project IDs consistent end to end. 3. Mandated beneficial ownership. Any contract over U100K must disclose real owners. Beneficial ownership concealment. Do ineligible bidder for 3 years. 4. Default sanctions table. Pre-published sanction bans. Late disclosure, no BO forms, bid rigging indicators. With progressive penalties. What good would look like in the Foya case, a concrete checklist. Within 14 days, government publishes project dossier, purpose, sponsor, financing, MRU correspondence, if any, PPCC references, contractors, subcontractors, supervising engineer, and site drawings. LACC issues investigation notice and requests preservation of records from Ministry of State, Public Works, Lofa Administration, and contractor. Within 30-45 days, PPCC rapid review report on compliance path. If non-compliant, order a standstill pending corrective action. O Ombudsman ruling on nepotism case with sanctions per Code Section 9.8, reprimand, removal, ban spectrum, accompanied by a public legal brief. Within 90 days, OGAC forensic audit of all extra budgetary capital works in FY24-25, management letter to legislature and public. O Asset Recovery TF Dashboard on Priority Cases, Coordination MOU with LACC published. Quick quip, fair point. If a US 10-minute site can't produce a 10-page dossier in 2 weeks, the problem isn't paperwork, it's purpose. Africa-wide benchmarking, why this matters for money and reputation. CENTAL's demand for full disclosure and sanctions is squarely in line with TI and Mo Ibrahim governance benchmarks, where accountability indicators move only when there's credible investigation plus visible sanction. Liberia's CPI rank and IIAG accountability scores won't improve with speeches, they improve with cases. Donor conditionality is increasingly tied to PFM credibility. And off-budget prestige projects are the classic red flag in EUWB budget support assessments. A transparent resolution here will materially affect budget support risk ratings in the coming cycle. See also the renewed anti-corruption stance flagged when the asset recovery order was signed. Communication strategy, how to tell the truth and keep the room. 1. Pre-bunk, not just debunk, don't wait for rumors, pre-publish contracts and MRU letters, if any. The MRU said so defense needs an MRU document. 2. One source of truth, a public tracker with time-stamped uploads, scan barcodes at the site that link to the tracker, yes, put a QR code on the site fence. 3. Civil society as co-auditors, invite CENTAL and NAMO to observe records reviews. Nothing cools tempers like shared facts. If government stalls, the plan B for accountability. Legislative hearings compel documents, non-compliance triggers statutory sanctions. Court applications for disclosure via public interest litigation. Civil society can and should test this. Donor-linked conditionality. Tie disbursements to a published PPCC compliance review and ombudsman decision. Media consortiums publish synchronized explainers with timelines and document repositories. Think Foya files. Yes, the name writes itself. The economics of transparency, from scandal to strategy. When governance falters, capital flees. When institutions act, confidence returns. The story of Liberia's alleged US $10 million villa and the nepotism flare-up isn't just about accountability. It's about macroeconomics in plain clothes. A. The financial consequences of secrecy. 1. Investor risk premiums, markets price integrity. A nation perceived as corrupt pays higher interest to borrow. According to the World Bank's Africa Pulse 2025, countries in the bottom quartile of Transparency International's CPI pay 1.8 to 2.5 percentage points more on sovereign debt than peers with stronger governance. For Liberia, that means tens of millions in extra debt service, enough to fund an entire national teacher training program. 2. Foreign direct investment, FDI. FDI inflows to Liberia averaged only US $85 million annually, 2021-2024, far below regional peers like Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana. Political scandals create the perception of instability, leading investors to adopt a wait-and-see stance. Transparency reforms can reverse that. After Ghana's e-procurement rollout 2019, FDI jumped by 18% within 2 years, attributed partly to improved governance perception. 3. Donor fatigue and budget support suspensions. Development partners increasingly tie aid to public finance performance. The EU's 2023 budget support guidelines emphasize credible PFM and procurement systems. Off-budget projects like the Foya Villa make Liberia look fiscally unpredictable. The quickest route to delayed disbursements and tougher loan conditions. Irony check, the more governments hide small sums domestically, the more they lose big sums internationally. B. The domestic payoff of openness. 1. Revenue trust loop. When citizens see transparent spending, they pay taxes willingly. Rwanda's revenue collection rose from 9% to 15% of GDP after digitized transparency and audit enforcement. Liberia's own tax to GDP ratio, 11%, could climb several points if people trust that their money builds, not disappears. 2. Public service efficiency. The World Bank's governance indicators show that every 10-point rise in government effectiveness corresponds to about a 1% increase in GDP per capita over 5 years. That's not abstract. It's salaries, clinics, and paved roads. 3. Diaspora re-engagement. Liberia's diaspora remits roughly US $350 million yearly, 3 times the national education budget. A credible transparency drive could transform remitters into investors, reversing brain drain into brain gain. C. The regional ripple, Mono River and beyond. 1. Sierra Leone is wrestling with its own post-election credibility gap. If Liberia demonstrates genuine reform, it sets a positive peer benchmark and pressures Freetown to follow suit. 2. Guinea's junta insists it seized power to fight corruption. A transparent Liberia weakens that justification and nudges Guinea back toward constitutionalism. 3. Côte d'Ivoire seeks regional economic leadership. A reformed Liberia could become its governance partner rather than its problem neighbor. Regional reputation isn't vanity. It shapes ECOWAS trade integration, donor compacts, and tourism flows. A forward lens, the reform dividend. If the Transparency Charter 2025 takes hold, Liberia could raise CPI score from 2740 within 5 years, matching Ghana's 2018 trajectory. Add US $200 to $300 million in cumulative donor and private inflows by 2030. Cut borrowing spreads by up to 150 basis points, saving US $20 million annually. Double domestic tax compliance through digital receipts and public dashboards. Transparency is not just ethics, it's development arithmetic. The geopolitical perspective, Africa's mirror moment. Across the continent, citizens are demanding transparency faster than leaders can rebrand it. Social media and data journalism have erased distance. A scandal in Foya can trend in Nairobi within hours. This means every leader now governs under a continental microscope. Those who embrace accountability will attract partners, while those who hide behind secrecy will attract satire and eventually sanctions. The Mo Ibrahim Index 2024 confirms it. Countries improving accountability also score higher in business environment, infrastructure, and human development. Governance is no longer a soft issue. It's the hard core of competitiveness. Advice to African leaders. 5 truths from Foya 1. Transparency is cheaper than secrecy. Cover-ups cost more than construction. Every hidden project becomes an expensive crisis management plan later. 2. Nepotism kills merit and reputation. Appointing relatives is not a family value, it's a fiscal hazard. Public trust collapses when power becomes hereditary. 3. Civil society is a partner, not a problem. Watchdogs like CENTAL or Budget are not enemies. They're early warning systems that prevent economic implosion. 4. Legacy is built on institutions, not infrastructure. A villa may stand for 20 years. An independent audit office can safeguard 20 generations. 5. Lead by example. Publicly asset declarations, procurement transparency, and live budget dashboards aren't PR stunts. They're the new currency of credibility in the 21st century global economy. If you must build a monument, as one Liberian preacher joked, make it a monument of honesty. It won't need repainting. Key takeaways. The lessons from Villagate. Theme lesson. Governance silence fuels suspicion, disclosure restores dignity, economy corruption is a macroeconomic drag disguised as politics. Judiciary nepotism erodes the rule of law faster than any coup. Media humor and evidence are twin engines of accountability. Citizens' transparency is not a gift from leaders, it's a right to be claimed. Closing reflection, building villas of trust. Liberia's saga, if managed with courage, can mark the dawn of a new political culture, one where scandals spark systems and citizens audit their governors in real time. Across Africa, this story echoes a single truth. Democracy is not measured by elections, but by explanations. Let every president, minister, and chief justice remember, it's better to build a foundation of trust than a villa of vanity, because when history writes its audit report, it never forgets who signed the invoice. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where Africa speaks without fear. The road to good governance in Africa is not paved with marble villas. It's built with transparency, justice, and accountability. Liberia's current storm is more than a local scandal. It's a continental mirror. What kind of legacy will our leaders choose, vanity or virtue? If you believe in a transparent and united Africa, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Together, let's keep raising the bold African voice.